For 30 years, you've shaped stone and mortar into dreams made manifest. Your mosques have echoed with 1,000,000 prayers. Your bridges have carried countless souls safely across treacherous waters. Yet tonight, the Sultan who once called you the empire's greatest treasure has signed your death warrant. Welcome to another journey through the shadows of history, where we explore one of the most dramatic confrontations between artistic genius and imperial power. Close your eyes, settle back, and let me take you to Istanbul in 1566, where the greatest architect in Ottoman history faces his darkest hour. Mimar Sinan had been reviewing plans for a new bridge when the imperial messenger arrived. The rolled parchment bore the Sultan's seal, heavy with crimson wax that seemed to pulse like dried blood in the lamplight of his workshop. After 30 years of service to the Ottoman throne, he recognized the formal language of imperial displeasure. By order of His Imperial Majesty, Sultan Süleymaniye, shadow of God on earth, you are commanded to present yourself before the throne to answer charges of architectural transgression and spiritual arrogance. The words struck him like stones. Sinan set down his compass and straightened, feeling every one of his 77 years settle into his bones. Around him, the workshop that had been his sanctuary for decades suddenly felt like a tomb. Sketches of domes and minarets lined the walls, each one a prayer made visible, each one now potentially evidence of his guilt. The messenger, a young man who couldn't meet the master architect's eyes, shifted nervously. Master Sinan, you are to appear at dawn. The Sultan. He paused, swallowing hard. The Sultan is greatly displeased. As the messenger departed, Sinan remained alone with his drawings and his mounting dread. Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent had been his patron, his protector, his greatest supporter for 3 decades. Together, they had transformed Istanbul into the most beautiful capital in the world. What could have possibly turned the Sultan against him now? Walking through the darkened streets of Istanbul toward the palace, Sinan passed beneath the shadows of his own creations. The Süleymaniye Mosque rose before him, its great dome seeming to hold up the very heavens. The structure represented the pinnacle of his architectural achievement, a perfect synthesis of engineering brilliance and spiritual aspiration. But now, as he looked up at its soaring silhouette, he wondered if others saw something different. Did they see pride instead of devotion? Arrogance instead of artistry? The accusation of spiritual arrogance echoed in his mind like an unwelcome prayer. The bridge across the Golden Horn bore his signature in stone, graceful arches that seemed to dance across the water. Thousands of people crossed it daily, merchants and pilgrims, soldiers and students. It was a bridge that connected not just 2 sides of a city, but 2 continents, east and west. Yet tonight it felt like a monument to his own impending doom. Each building he passed told a story of his life's work. The Süleymaniye Mosque in Edirne, considered by many to be his masterpiece. The Mihrimah Sultan Mosque, designed for the Sultan's daughter. Countless bridges, baths, schools, and fountains that served the empire's people. 30 years of devotion carved in stone and mortar. How had it all led to this moment of disgrace? The throne room of Topkapi Palace felt colder than Sinan remembered. Sultan Süleyman sat motionless on his golden throne, his once magnificent presence now diminished by age and the weight of countless campaigns. The ruler who had expanded the empire to its greatest extent now looked weary, suspicious, haunted by perceived threats from every direction. Mimar Sinan. The Sultan's voice carried across the vast chamber like the sound of distant thunder. For 30 years, I have given you my trust, my resources, my protection. I have allowed you to reshape the face of my empire, to create monuments that will outlast us both. Sinan prostrated himself before the throne, forehead touching the cold marble floor. My Sultan. I have served only Allah and your glorious reign. Have you? The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Or have you served your own ambition? Do your buildings glorify God, or do they glorify Mimar Sinan? The architect felt his heart constrict. This was the accusation he had always feared, the doubt that gnawed at the soul of every artist who dared to create something beautiful. Where was the line between divine inspiration and human pride? Sultan Suleiman continued, his voice growing harder with each word. Your domes grow larger with each mosque you build. Your bridges span greater distances. Your minarets reach higher toward heaven. Are you trying to outdo God himself? The charges against Sinan had been building for months, whispered in the corridors of power by jealous rivals and conservative clerics who viewed architectural innovation with suspicion. They pointed to his increasingly ambitious designs, his willingness to experiment with new forms and engineering techniques. The ancient ways were sufficient for our ancestors, argued Imam Qasimi, one of Sinan's most vocal critics. Why must this architect constantly push boundaries, constantly seek to build higher, wider, more grandly than what came before? Such behavior suggests a man who believes himself capable of improving upon divine perfection. The criticism had found fertile ground in the Sultan's aging mind. Suleiman, now in his 72nd year, had grown increasingly suspicious of those around him. The execution of his son Mustafa years earlier had scarred his soul, making him see potential betrayal in every ambitious act. Sinan's architectural innovations, his use of massive central domes, his integration of light and space, his structural experiments that pushed the boundaries of what stone and mortar could achieve, were reinterpreted as signs of dangerous pride. He builds not for Allah, but for his own glory, whispered the court gossips. Each mosque becomes a monument to Mimar Sinan rather than to God. The master architect had heard these rumors but had dismissed them as the jealous mutterings of lesser men. He had never imagined they would reach the Sultan's ears, much less poison the mind of the ruler who had been his greatest champion. Standing before the assembled court, Sinan felt the weight of his entire life's work hanging in the balance. Around him, the faces of court officials reflected a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and barely concealed anticipation of his downfall. "My Sultan," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "If my buildings appear grand, it is because they serve a grand purpose. They are not monuments to Mimar Sinan, but houses for the prayers of your people." He gestured toward the walls of the palace itself, which bore his architectural influence. "Every dome I have raised seeks to mirror the dome of heaven. Every arch I have built frames the infinite. Every minaret points toward Allah, not toward the architect who shaped its stones." The Sultan's expression remained unreadable, but Sinan pressed on. "The Süleymaniye Mosque contains space for 10,000 worshippers. Should I have made it smaller so that fewer people could gather to praise Allah? Should I have built it weaker so that future generations could not benefit from its shelter?" Murmurs rippled through the court. Some nodded in agreement, recognizing the logic of his argument. Others frowned, seeing sophisticated reasoning as evidence of the architect's dangerous pride. "The bridges I have built," Sinan continued, "carry your armies swiftly to defend the empire's borders. They allow merchants to trade, scholars to travel, pilgrims to reach holy sites. Should I have made them narrower, weaker, less capable of serving your people?" The trial had become more than a judgment of architectural choices. It had evolved into a fundamental question about the nature of artistic creation itself. Was it possible to create something beautiful without pride? Could human genius serve divine purpose, or was ambition inherently sinful? Sinan found himself defending not just his own work, but the very idea that mortals could participate in the act of creation without blasphemy. My Sultan, when Allah created the world, He made it beautiful. The flowers, the mountains, the stars, all speak of divine love for beauty itself. The court fell silent, hanging on every word. Even the Sultan leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite his anger. If Allah had intended for human creation to be ugly, crude, or merely functional, He would not have given us the capacity to see beauty, to imagine perfection, to strive for excellence. The impulse to create beauty comes from Him. It is part of the divine spark He placed within human souls. Imam Qasimi stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. You speak of divine sparks and human souls as if you were a theologian, rather than a mere builder. This itself shows the arrogance that corrupts your work. Sinan turned to face his accuser directly. I am indeed a mere builder, Your Honor, but I build with materials Allah provided, following laws of physics He established, creating beauty that reflects His perfection. How can this be arrogance when every stone acknowledges its dependence on the Creator? As the debate continued, Sinan felt the full weight of his 77 years. His body ached from decades of climbing scaffolding, inspecting construction sites, working alongside common laborers to ensure his visions became reality. His eyes strained from countless hours bent over architectural drawings by candlelight. But more than physical fatigue, he felt the spiritual exhaustion of a man whose life's work was being called into question. Every mosque he had built contained thousands of prayers. Every bridge he had constructed had saved countless lives by providing safe passage over dangerous waters. Every school and hospital bearing his architectural signature had served the empire's people for decades. Had it all been meaningless pride? The question tormented him because he could not answer it with complete certainty. When he designed a new dome larger than any built before, was he serving Allah or serving his own ambition? When he pushed the boundaries of engineering to create more beautiful spaces, was he participating in divine creation or competing with it? The line between inspiration and arrogance had always been thin, almost invisible. Perhaps that was why so many artists throughout history had struggled with guilt, with the fear that their gifts were more curse than blessing. Sultan Suleiman gazed down at the architect who had transformed his empire's appearance, and memories flooded his aging mind. He remembered their first meeting 30 years earlier, when Sinan had been a young military engineer whose innovative fortress designs had caught the Sultan's attention. He recalled the excitement in Sinan's eyes when commissioned to build the Shahzadeh Mosque, the architect's first major religious project. The building had been magnificent, a perfect balance of tradition and innovation that announced the emergence of a new architectural genius. The Sultan remembered walking through the completed Süleymaniye Mosque for the first time, feeling his breath catch as he experienced the interplay of light and shadow, space and stone that Sinan had orchestrated. It had been like standing inside a prayer made manifest. But he also remembered the whispers that had grown louder with each passing year. Complaints that Sinan had become too independent, too willing to experiment, too confident in his own judgment. The conservative faction at court had argued that such innovation bordered on religious transgression. Now, looking at the elderly architect prostrated before his throne, Suleiman wondered if his own fears and suspicions had been manipulated by jealous rivals seeking to destroy a man whose genius overshadowed their own mediocrity. "Rise, Mimar Sinan," the Sultan commanded, his voice softer than it had been earlier. "I would hear more of your philosophy regarding creation and service." Sinan struggled to his feet, his aged joints protesting the movement. Around him, the court waited in tense silence for what might be his final words. "My Sultan, I have spent my life trying to understand how human hands can serve divine purpose. I believe the answer lies in intention and humility. When I design a building, I begin not with my own vision, but with prayer. I ask Allah to guide my hand, to show me how to create spaces worthy of His worship. The architect's voice grew stronger as he continued. Every calculation I make follows mathematical principles He established. Every structural decision respects physical laws He created. I am not competing with divine creation. I am participating in it, as a craftsman participates in the work of his master. Imam Qasimi interrupted again. Yet your buildings grow ever more ambitious, ever more complex. How do you explain this constant pushing of boundaries if not as evidence of pride? Sinan turned to address not just the Imam, but the entire assembled court. Because human understanding of divine truth grows deeper with experience. The more I study Allah's creation, the more I understand about beauty, proportion, and harmony. Should I ignore this growing understanding? Should I deliberately build inferior structures to appear humble? The Sultan had remained silent for long minutes, his weathered face revealing nothing of his internal struggle. Finally, he spoke. Mimar Sinan, you will accompany me to the Süleymaniye Mosque. I would see your greatest work through your eyes. The court stirred with surprise. Such an impromptu royal visit was unprecedented, especially during what amounted to a trial for the architect's life. The procession to the mosque took place in profound silence. Sultan, architect, court officials, and guards walked through the streets of Istanbul as dawn began to break over the city. The early morning light cast long shadows between the buildings, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. When they entered the mosque, the Sultan walked slowly toward the center of the vast prayer hall. The great dome soared overhead, supported by massive pillars that seemed to grow from the earth like stone trees. Light poured through carefully placed windows, creating patterns that shifted subtly as the sun climbed higher. "Tell me what you see," the Sultan commanded, his voice echoing in the vast space. Sinan looked up at his own creation with fresh eyes, seeing it as if for the first time. "I see space that invites the soul to expand, to reach toward the infinite. I see light that reminds us of divine illumination. I see proportions that echo the mathematical harmony underlying all creation." He paused, then continued with growing emotion. "But most of all, my Sultan, I see a place where 10,000 people can gather to worship Allah together, where their prayers can rise as one voice toward heaven." Sultan Suleiman stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, his eyes traveling from the soaring dome to the graceful arches, from the intricate decorations to the play of light and shadow across the stone surfaces. Around them, the mosque began to fill with worshippers arriving for the dawn prayer. "I see something else," the Sultan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see the prayers of my people given physical form. I see beauty that draws the soul toward Allah rather than toward the architect who created it." He turned to face Sinan directly. "You have built not monuments to your own glory, but invitations to worship. Your domes do not compete with heaven. They frame a window through which mortals can glimpse divine perfection." The tension that had gripped Sinan's chest for hours began to ease. "My Sultan, I have tried only to serve Allah and your glorious reign." "And you have succeeded magnificently," Suleiman replied. "But in my old age, I have allowed the whispers of small minds to cloud my judgment. I have forgotten that true service to Allah sometimes requires pushing boundaries, striving for excellence, refusing to settle for mediocrity." The Sultan's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the mosque. "Let it be known that Mimar Sinan has my complete trust and protection. Let no man dare suggest that his architectural genius serves any master other than Allah." As the court officials and guards filed out of the mosque, Sinan found himself alone with the Sultan among the gathering worshippers. The crisis had passed, but its lessons would remain with him for the rest of his life. "You have taught me something today," Sultan Suleiman said quietly. "In my concern for avoiding the appearance of pride, I nearly destroyed the greatest artistic treasure in my empire. Sometimes the fear of sin can itself become sinful." Sinan bowed deeply. "And you have reminded me, my Sultan, that even the most devoted service can be misunderstood. I must be more careful to explain my intentions, to help others see the spiritual purpose behind architectural innovation." The Sultan nodded slowly. "We are both old men, Mimar Sinan. Our time grows short, but your buildings will outlast both of us, continuing to serve Allah long after we are dust. That is a legacy worth defending." As they walked together from the mosque, the first rays of sunlight struck the great dome, setting it ablaze with golden light. The sight reminded both men of why they had devoted their lives to creating beauty in service of divine truth. The news of Sinan's vindication spread quickly through Istanbul and beyond. The architect who had faced execution at dawn found himself restored to his position of honor and trust. More importantly, the crisis had clarified his own understanding of his role as an artist in service to divine purpose. In the days that followed, Sinan returned to his workshop with renewed energy and purpose. The drawings that had seemed like evidence of guilt now appeared as what they truly were: plans for structures that would serve the empire's people for centuries to come. The Sultan, meanwhile, had learned valuable lessons about the dangers of allowing suspicion and fear to override wisdom and experience. He recognized that his own advancing age had made him vulnerable to the manipulations of those who sought to destroy what they could not understand or create themselves. The relationship between ruler and architect, tested by crisis, emerged stronger than before. Sultan Suleiman began visiting construction sites more frequently, taking renewed interest in the architectural projects that were transforming his empire's cities. In his final years, Sinan often reflected on the night he had nearly lost everything. The experience had taught him that artistic genius without spiritual grounding was indeed dangerous, but that spiritual devotion without the courage to strive for excellence was equally problematic. He began training younger architects, passing on not just technical knowledge, but the philosophical framework that had sustained him through decades of creation. "Never forget," he would tell his students, "that we are servants, not masters, but Allah expects His servants to use their gifts fully, to strive for excellence in His service." The buildings he completed after his trial showed even greater integration of spiritual and aesthetic concerns. His final masterpiece, the Süleymaniye Mosque in Edirne, represented the perfect synthesis of structural innovation and religious devotion, a building that pushed the boundaries of what was architecturally possible while serving unmistakably as a house of worship. When Mimar Sinan finally died in 1588 at the age of 99, he left behind more than just buildings. He had established the principle that artistic excellence and spiritual devotion were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of divine service. His architectural legacy included over 300 major works: mosques that still echo with prayers, bridges that still carry travelers safely across dangerous waters, schools and hospitals that continue to serve their communities. But perhaps more importantly, he had demonstrated that human creativity could serve divine purpose without falling into the trap of spiritual arrogance. The crisis that nearly ended his career became instead a defining moment that clarified his philosophy and strengthened his resolve. It proved that true artistic genius lies not in avoiding all criticism, but in remaining true to the divine inspiration that motivates creation while remaining humble before the source of all creativity. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll remember the lesson of Mimar Sinan's darkest hour. In a world that often forces us to choose between excellence and humility, between ambition and devotion. His story reminds us that the highest achievement comes from serving something greater than ourselves. The mosques, bridges, and schools that still bear his architectural signature continue to serve their communities more than 4 centuries later. They stand as permanent reminders that human hands, guided by divine inspiration and motivated by genuine service, can create beauty that outlasts empires. Sinan's crisis and vindication illustrate the eternal tension between creation and worship, between pushing boundaries and respecting tradition. His resolution of this tension through the principle of service to divine purpose offers guidance for anyone who struggles to use their gifts without falling into pride. Sleep well, knowing that throughout history, dedicated souls have found ways to serve eternal purposes through temporal work, to create lasting beauty through mortal hands, to glorify divine perfection through human imperfection. In their courage to create despite criticism, in their persistence through crisis, we find inspiration for our own efforts to serve something greater than ourselves. True artistry serves not the artist's glory, but the glory of the one who inspired all creation.